Yeah, I brought you a packet. But it's, yeah, I don't have it with me. I brought
No, it's
Tom
okay.
one too.
Okay.
But
Have at it.
okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start momentarily. Mary Chacon, our moderator. Welcome, Mary.
Good morning. Thank you for all being here this morning. And I'd like to welcome you to the League of Women Voters Greater Verde Valley Candidates Forum for Democratic candidates running for Legislative District 6. I am Mary Chacon, a member of the League of Women Voters and your moderator for this forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization and neither supports nor opposes any candidate or political party. Our mission is to encourage informed and active participation in government, work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influence public policy through education and advocacy. And just so you know, which is pretty obvious, for the benefit of those who could not be joining us this morning, we are having this forum videotaped by Yavapai Broadcasting, Verde Valley Television, for broadcast on Cable 1 Channel 2. This is not live this morning, but they will be running the tape, I believe, twice a week up until the primary elections. The purpose of this forum is to inform and educate ourselves about the Democratic candidates running for Legislative District 6. Our candidates are Mr. Doug Ballard and Ms. Angela Lefevre. These two candidates will begin with a 2-minute opening statement, and they will share with us a little bit about their background, their reason for running, and their qualifications. Before we begin to hear from the candidates, let me just share with you a little of the housekeeping information and how the forum will work this morning. First of all, let me introduce our timekeeper, Richard Kiesel. Dick's role is to keep us all sort of on task and on time. He has 3 signs, a 1-minute one, a 30-second one, and a stop sign. When the candidate sees the stop sign, they will have the opportunity to finish their sentence, and then they will have to end. Following the open statements, candidates will then be asked to respond to 2 questions that they have received in advance. Each candidate will have 3 minutes for each of those questions. As the candidates are speaking, you, the audience, can be writing out your questions on 3x5 cards, which I believe have been handed out. If you have a question, I ask that you just raise it up, and one of our question takers will gather them. And what they will be doing is pulling the questions that are similar together and then giving them to me to ask the candidates. We will continue going through the questions that are prepared until about 20 after 10, when we will stop that and we will provide our candidates with the opportunity for their closing statements. Also know that both candidates have agreed to stay after the forum in case you feel that your own personal question needs a little more information and a little more help, a little more response. Our forum helpers this morning are Mary Gassaway, Ruth Kiesel, and Ellie Bauer, all members of the League. And they will be around picking up the questions. Before the forum began, I had each of the candidates draw numbers, so we will be rotating back and forth. The one who starts with their opening statement will be second when it comes to the closing statements. That order is Angela Lefevre will start with her opening statement, and Doug Ballard will be second on his opening statement. So without further ado, I would like to begin with the opening statements on our candidates, and we will begin with Angela, and you have 2 minutes.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Angela Lefevre, and first of all, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this panel discussion. I come to you today as a candidate for the Arizona House of Representatives for the newly drawn LD6. We finally have an evenly balanced district where every vote will count. I feel lucky that I have lived in this beautiful district for 8 years now, During this time, I've talked to many people who've given me insight and told me about the things they want: a decent, well-paid job, a good education for their kids. I'm running because I believe our state's government has lost sight of the basic needs of the people who live here. My life experiences have qualified me for this position. I've lived in 4 different countries, but I chose the United States as my home, where I have lived for over half my life. I've raised 2 children here as a single parent. My children have benefited from the public school education. In fact, I was a 4th grade teacher many years ago. Later on, I started my own telecommunications business. And I worked as senior manager in Quest Communications for 14 years. I have a degree in economics from the London School of Economics. I was a teacher, an entrepreneur, and an executive. During my life, I've spent much time mentoring teenagers through Goodwill Industries and more recently through Catholic Charities right here in Cottonwood. I have given classes at Mingus High, teaching young people the importance of managing their personal finances. I was a part-time supervisor for the Yavapai Juvenile Probation Youth Restitution Program. Politically, I've stayed behind the scenes, working on campaigns, in particular as president of the Democrats in Sedona and first vice chair of Yavapai County Democrats. My father taught me to stand up for what I think is right, that fulfilling dreams can happen if you work harder and work smarter. And that's what I promise you. I'll work harder and smarter to represent the citizens of LD6. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug?
Great. Well, I also would like to thank the League. In fact, my mom was active in the League back in New Jersey a long time ago, and I really value what you do. My background is I'm retired after a 31-year career of public service, and that was really my calling. I was in planning and economic development for my entire career. The last 14 years, I was planning and development director for the city of Chandler, Arizona. Had a pretty big department, over 120 people, budget of over $25 million. Always turned money back to the city, except for 1 year when they gave me more staff in the middle of the year. If you're at all familiar with Chandler, you know that it grew really exponentially, and it did that when I was there. I worked on all the big Intel projects. The first project I worked on was Intel Fab 12. At the time, it was the largest private sector equity project in the history of the world. It was $4.5 billion. I worked on the teams that attracted Intel Fab 22 to Chandler. That was also a multi-billion-dollar project. I worked on Fab 32 and also set the stage for Fab 42, which is now under construction. I worked on all of the big high-tech projects that Chandler got. Over 8 million square feet worth of industrial development, over 6 million square feet of retail development, over 1.7 million square feet of office development. Why am I running? Obviously, it's the economy, it's jobs. I too, as Angela had said, I too think that the legislature's been spending its time on things that really aren't improving our lives. And that's one of the things that I want to do. And obviously, education is absolutely central to that. Jobs and education are joined at the hip. Right now, we rank 48th in the nation in terms of what we spend on our children. And that's really unacceptable. We have no economic future if we can't turn that around, and that's why I'm running. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will begin with the questions that the candidates have both had an opportunity to prepare in advance. We will start with Angela on the first question, and let me read the question to you. Each candidate has 3 minutes to respond to the question. The first question: the League of Women Voters believes that some government-provided services could be delivered more efficiently by private entities. However, privatization is not appropriate in all circumstances. Do you agree? And if so, what services would you privatize? And are these privatized services that should be provided by the state, and why?
Okay.
And
privatization can work, but there are plenty of exceptions. The electoral process, justice, the military, protecting public lands, ensuring public safety, providing education, environmental protection are instances where the government should remain in charge. We need oversight and consistency, such as air and water quality protections, as well as food and drug safety. Government and privatization have certainly become the buzzwords. We do not need to declare war on government. We need to work together to get the best possible solution. Those who support privatization will tell you that private corporations can provide better quality services more efficiently, reduce taxes, be good for business, and will create more jobs. And those against, they say costs to consumers will actually increase, creating a ripe atmosphere for corruption, job loss, and no access to collective bargaining. There's a fear of loss of transparency and accountability. A case in point, privatization of the public school system. Voucher systems would use tax dollars to purchase tuition for students in private schools. The school tuition organizations, or STOs, allow individuals to use tax credits to be diverted to private schools. Not only does this taxpayer money go to those who can well afford private schools, but these organizations are for profit, and even state representatives are making money by setting them up. There are good charter schools, good private schools, but there's little oversight or consistency from one school to the next. There should be choice, but this should not come at the expense of high standards or lowering the standards of our public education system. And then there are private for-profit colleges. Senator Tom Harkin came out with a quote this week on a report that was just published, and to quote, "You will find overwhelming documentation of overpriced tuition, predatory recruiting practices, sky-high dropout rates, billions spent on marketing and advertising. These are not the exception. This is the norm." Wow, this is frightening. Yet profits in such organizations remain high. Private prisons are another example where privatization has been shown to be more costly and less efficient and safe than government-run prisons. I need not elaborate on this. We've experienced the very worst here in Arizona. However, private and public enterprise can commingle to provide a viable, acceptable option. For example, in Payson, an agreement between the Forest Services, Arizona State University, and a private corporation is bringing about a much-needed four-year accredited college to Payson. Certainly, turning away all privatization is not the answer, but saying that government is the problem is not a solution. Good government can and does work. It builds our interstates, finances space exploration, does so much. Privatization of our social security and our Medicare and our public lands is not the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug?
Thank you. And I also agree that privatization has a role to play, but it has to be clearly defined, the mission has to be clearly defined, and the outcome needs to be clearly defined. Examples where that really works particularly well might be providing food services at a public park, or janitorial services, or property maintenance services. Those things can make sense to privatize. Where we run into problems, though, I think, is where we try to privatize and there are competing interests. And I think, as Angela had mentioned, the privatization of our prison systems are a clear example of problems that can be created when we try to privatize. The motivation for private prisons are obviously to make money. Nothing wrong with that. However, when we're talking about public safety, that should be the overriding consideration, and yet it is not. And many of you were probably aware of the escapes in Kingman, where 2 people ultimately died as a result of lax enforcement in private prisons, the understaffing in those private prisons, the lack of training in those private prisons. All those things require money. Well, the for-profit organization that was running that prison made a conscious decision not to invest in those things. And that's public safety stuff. That we cannot afford to gamble with. It's just too darn important. And so those are the types of things that I would suggest are totally inappropriate for privatization. And as Angela had mentioned, our private prisons, I mean, the theory behind it is, gee, it's going to save us money. Well, no, it does not. An independent organization recently came out with a study that showed that private prisons in Arizona cost us $10 million a year more than if we were to be running them. And if we ran them, we would be sure that public safety is the overriding consideration, not a company's bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me again ask if anyone has any questions from the floor to please raise your hand with those cards. And for the second question, just so you know, Doug, we'll start with you, okay?
Okay.
Let me read the second question. The 2010 Supreme Court decision in Citizens United created major loopholes in the disclosure of spending by campaigns and outside groups. H.R. 4010, the Disclose Act, would ensure that citizens know on a timely basis the identities of and amounts given by donors who are funding campaign expenditures by tax-exempt organizations, and we would require super PACs and other independent spending entities that run broadcast ads to identify their top 5 donors and the amounts they give in each TV ad, and that the top official of the group appear in each TV ad and take responsibility for it. Do you believe that such measures are necessary and should be required? Why or why not?
Thank you. I'm fully supportive, enthusiastically supportive of the new Disclose Act of 2012, introduced by Chris Van Hollen. In any kind of functioning democracy, transparency is absolutely essential. Citizens United, I think, if everyone's familiar with that, is of particular concern because it basically ruled that money equals free speech. And of course, money does not equal free speech. But what's really important, regardless of Citizens United, and what was a hole in our process before Citizens United, was full disclosure. I know the 2010 Disclose Act that did not go forward tried to address that, but it also tried to address other things. The nice thing that I like about this particular Disclose Act that was recently introduced, I think in February, is that it deals solely with the issue of disclosure and making issues transparent. I think the Supreme Court and Citizens United opined or mentioned a prior case, and they actually indicated that requiring full disclosure is constitutional. It just requires an act of Congress to do it, and that's what we need to do. We need to tighten up the rules that the FEC monitors on this. The public has a right to know who's paying for these ads. And so I'm absolutely fully supportive. I don't think it's important. I think it's absolutely essential. There's a broader issue, of course, with Citizens United and whether corporations are people and whether money equals speech. That's another item, obviously, that's related and dear to my heart because I think that that has opened up an untenable situation that will make it very, very hard for our democracy to function. So I'm hopeful that we'll see some type of a constitutional amendment or something like that long-term on down the road. But the most immediate thing, obviously, is to disclose these contributions. Thank you.
Angela?
In 2010, the Supreme Court's decision on Citizens United granting personhood status to corporations opened the floodgates to selling elections to the highest bidder. Prior to this, the gates to buy elections were cracked open in 1976, when in the case of Buckley versus Verde, the Supreme Court ruled that spending money to influence elections is a form of constitutionally protected free speech. This has resulted in giving an unfair advantage to corporations, labor unions, super PACs, and wealthy individuals in our federal elections. It also makes the politicians they fund beholden to them and affects public policy and the rest of us for years to come. Citizens United, in particular, gives extraordinary influence over elections to outcomes beneficial to them, not always in the best interests of the public. Even at this junction, when the real election season has not yet begun, we've seen obscene amounts of money going into the campaigns. Corporations with public agendas, for instance, the Coke. Do you want me to start? Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Even at this juncture, when the real election season has not yet begun, we've seen obscene amounts of money going to the campaigns. Corporations with political agendas, for instance, the Koch brothers, are sitting on trillions of dollars while the rest of the country deals with debt, foreclosure, job loss, ruined retirement. Those dollars buy expensive airtime on radio and television, and we don't know who the real contributors are. The Federal Disclosure Act won't undo Citizens United. In fact, it does not go far enough. What we really need is a total overhaul of our election financing system. Not only are special interests buying elections, but our representatives, once elected, immediately start fundraising again for the next elections, tying their hands further to these lobbyists. We have made some reforms, for instance, here in the state of Arizona. However, it's not gone far enough. When the Federal Disclosure Act, what the Federal Disclosure Act will do is bring some transparency to the elections. There'll be no more man behind the curtain hocus pocus. H 4010 and its twin in the Senate, that's 3369, would redefine independent expenditures as someone who influences either for or against the campaign of a specific candidate. In addition, corporations would have to disclose to shareholders how they are spending investors' money and on whom. And it would bring some clarity as to how lobbyists are spending their money. Independent expenditures of $1,000 or more would have to be disclosed. It makes sense. Maybe that's why H 4010 has sat in committee since February and why S 3369 was actually defeated in the Senate on July the 19th. I do support provisions of H 4010. It brings transparency and truth back into our political process. H 4010 is a step in the right direction, one that I firmly support.
Thank you. And now we will move to the audience questions. As a reminder, each candidate will have 1 minute to answer the questions. Also, I got a question this morning, so let me start with that. The question from the audience is why only Democratic candidates? If Republicans were invited, what were the reasons for not attending? The Republicans have all had a conflict. That's why there is not a Republican forum following this one this morning. So they are at other events today. Okay, on to your questions. The first, and we'll start with Angela on this, okay? Who or what body would oversee privatized services that once were government run? Wouldn't that create another layer of government?
That's a very good point, and that's one why I'm rather hesitant to support privatization as a whole, because that's exactly what you're doing. The problem with privatization is that we don't have overall control, transparency like we do on government when government does its business. Government programs are highly subject to control and regulation. There's one way of doing it, which has been tried in certain parts of the country, whereby in the contract that the government makes with a private body, they put in certain requirements as regards reporting and so on. This would maybe alleviate the problem as far as overhaul watchdog authorization is concerned. Normally, they basically are beholden to themselves. If privatization is to work, I do believe there has to be a government body overseeing, and yes, that is a problem, a bureaucratic problem. Thank you. Doug?
Well, actually, in Chandler, as Planning and Development Director, we contracted with certain firms to provide plan review services, and we did that because we wanted to have our staff maintain a certain level of service, and as growth ramped and cycled, we would be able to quickly ramp up by providing those services by bringing in contract employees. So we were responsible for administering those contracts. The Department of Corrections, for example, is responsible for administering the contracts for privatization. They just haven't been doing a very good job. So the Park Service, for example, administers contracts that it lets out. So there are already systems in place for monitoring and evaluating these contracts. We just have to make sure that they're actually doing the job that they're supposed to. So I don't think it needs an extra level of bureaucracy per se. I am also, however, concerned that there's just too much of a rush to privatize. And that's it.
Great, thank you. The next question. Given the history of private prisons, what will you do to create an environment where there is appropriate review and transparency of profit levels and costs? Doug, why don't you start?
Okay. Well, that actually is the core of the problem right now with the Arizona Department of Corrections. Private prisons are not required to track recidivism, for example. They're not required to do the same things that publicly administered prisons are required to do. And the Department of Corrections has been very, very lax in reviewing those minimum things that private prisons are supposed to do. You know, I think there was a series of audits that have been done that have shown that security cameras were left broken for years, or for long periods of time, rather, that understaffing was problematic, the training wasn't there. And so those are some of the fundamental problems that we have when we think that, oh gee, privatization is just such a wonderful thing. No, it's not. It requires a lot of oversight. And I think there needs to be fundamental reform with the Department of Corrections in that respect.
Thank you. Angela?
Yeah, I think many of us have a huge problem with the way our prisons are run in Arizona, and certainly our private prisons have caused, as Doug pointed out, we've had murderers escape who have murdered others and so on. And I think the basic problem is oversight, but the core is the fact that these prisons are being run for profit, and the boards on the prisons even have connections with the state legislature, and that is unacceptable. How on earth that can happen, I don't know. Our taxation money is going into these private prisons as opposed to going into our education. You know, education, maybe if we educated our children more so that they would not fall off the end and be ending up in prison, that might be a better way of using our money. So I would say what I would do is, number one, I would turn it around if I could, so that there would be less money going to private prisons, more going into public prisons, and more going into public education.
Thank you. School tuition organizations have a 10% administrative fee. What will you do to audit these fees and review if they are too high? Angela.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
Certainly.
Yeah.
School tuition organizations have a 10% administrative fee. What will you do to audit these fees and review them if they are too high?
I don't like the whole idea of these STOs, actually. The Arizona Republic did an amazing article on the series of articles on these, and it's very scary. Number one is that many of the funds that go there are not spent. To me, that is ridiculous and dangerous. Number two, they're being set up by state legislators. Again, question mark. To me, ethics, is that right? Number three, they are going to schools to scholarships. They give scholarships and credits specifically to kids whose parents are earning more than $80,000 a year, who normally would be putting their kids in private schools anyway. So I would review the whole situation of STOs, not just how much they are for profit, not just how much they're making, but I'd review what they're doing and how their funds are being expended, because they're not right now. Thank you.
Well, I too am really concerned. I think that the situation right now is really not being monitored at all. There really is no oversight. You have these administrative fees that are going for things that aren't really improving a child's education in some respects. And I'm also familiar with the Arizona Republic series of articles on those. And what's even fundamentally, I think, more destructive is it's taking money away from our public schools. Right now, again, as I said before, we're ranked near the bottom of the barrel in terms of what we spend on our kids. And we can't afford to waste money like we have been wasting with these fees. And so we're going to have to come up with some type of a rigorous oversight process. I don't know if that would be with the state auditor, or whether it would be with the legislature, or with with whom, but clearly we have to set up an oversight process, clearly. And I also agree that fundamentally we need to look at why we're doing this and is it having any positive effect whatsoever.
Thank you. Do you support the 1-cent sales tax for education initiative, and why? Doug?
Yes, I very much support it for many of the reasons I said before. Unfortunately, when the 1-cent sales tax passed the first time by the voters, very little of that money actually made it to our schools. And I think that is a violation of the public trust. The public spoke when they voted in the 1-cent sales tax, and the legislature took away. Not right, just not right. We have to turn our schools around if we're at all interested in our economy. Craig Barrett himself in 2010 said that Arizona is not going to be seeing any new major locates because of the state of our school systems. We cannot afford not to pass the 1-cent sales tax and extend it.
I have a huge problem and a personal problem with this because part of me wants monies going into education. I don't like using sales tax to be doing that. Guess who it hits? It hits the middle class again. And I don't like this. I voted for the 1% before, and if it is on the ballot, I probably will again because a part of me can't see our public schools being dropping more teachers, dropping more funds. It's a very, very difficult situation I face. Sales tax is not a way of doing it. It basically hits those who can least afford it. I would like to see in future the state legislature really readdressing their budget so that more monies go into our schools, less goes into giving large corporations tax breaks. There are other ways of doing a budget, and unfortunately, the Democratic side has not been given a chance. I hope they will be next year.
Thank you. What are your views on the role of education on workforce development? Arizona's education funding is near the bottom in the country. What will you do to overcome this funding issue, and do you believe money is the only answer? Angela.
I just spoke to that. Of course, yes. I think that's one of the things, and we need to redo our budgets, look at the schools as places which need to be invested in. I think it's also quality of teachers, quantity of teachers. We cannot bring good teachers in if they are paid so poorly. We need to totally reassess the way teachers are assessed, but not just assessed, but also treated. It's a noble profession, one that I've done myself. And I know that children develop their futures when they have a good teacher who impresses them and gives them that enjoyment of education and also guidance to where they want to go. So yes, money is definitely important for books and for all the other articles that we need in our schools, but I think also we need to look at the teaching and our quality of our teaching.
Yeah, I think in any kind of a program to improve our economy, workforce development is absolutely essential. And I think, obviously, it's going to take money, but there are efficient mechanisms for accomplishing these things, and they're called our community colleges. We have, right now, a major plant closing in eastern Arizona. It's in our district. One of the things we need to look at is working with the community college there to help retrain many of these these people, 300 people that are going to be out of work. So we have to provide the tools necessary for people to learn, obviously, and we also have to form partnerships with businesses. And the best and most efficient way to do that is through our community colleges. And there are wonderful workforce development programs that they already have. They just need our support.
How do you propose to represent a district as diverse as Legislative District 6? Doug.
Travel a lot, wear out a lot of shoes. already doing that. But I'll tell you that I think this new legislative district has a lot more in common than past legislative districts have had. In the Verde Valley, for example, you're no longer competing with other entities to the west, over such fundamental things as water and things like that. And so I think that that we'll be able to develop a more responsive approach toward residents in this district because I think that we have so much more in common now. Obviously, the Four Forests Initiative that's coming online is going to be huge in the eastern part of the district as well as the northern part of the district. I think water and the protection of water is going to be important. That's something that's key to Flagstaff. It's obviously something that's terribly important to the Verde Valley. And I think we now have a geographic area that will allow us to work together more than we have in the past.
Yes, definitely. It's a huge district, and I agree with Doug. It's not as diverse as one would think. I think there are areas where not only are they similar, but also we can learn from each other, from the different parts. Tourism, of course, is huge, and I think that's one area that we need to really look on as ways of improving and representing our area, and at the same time, environmental, where we have to protect our area. I always use the phrase, don't kill the golden goose. And I think we need to respect our area and allow people to come in and enjoy it. I was looking at, I mentioned in one of my speeches here about Payson and what they're doing regarding ASU and some new educational partnerships in order to create a four-year college. I think we can learn from that. I think that's a wonderful idea, and it brings in even the forest services because it involves a land exchange, but it's one way of utilizing all our resources, and we can learn from it.
Great, thank you. What is your position on senseless and wasteful wars, like the ones in Iraq, Afghanistan, and hopefully not in the future in Iran? And your position on assault weapons. That's a biggie.
How's one got to do with the other?
Well, we can take them as both, but...
Okay.
2 questions? Sure, we can take 2. All right, let's start with your position on war. And I believe, Angela, you're up first.
Gosh, I don't like wars. As an extension of foreign policy, I don't think they're effective. I was a student of international relations, and it's ironic, going way back then, I won't tell you how many years ago it was, many years ago, when I was at university, looking at the Middle East, there's been not much progress. That's sad. We're continually in and out of local wars, and God forbid that they would expand to an international war. We've managed not to push the button yet, but it's something that, to me, is frightening. That wars, what this country has gotten into is wrong, I feel. Iraq was wrong. Afghanistan we were drawn into, I'm glad we're getting out of. I would like to see ourselves using more diplomacy and working with our allies as far as possible. There's huge issues in the Middle East now with the Arab countries finally creating revolution. I won't go any further, I've got to stop. Okay. I could go on for half an hour with that one.
Yeah. Well, first off, I'd like to really thank members of the military, obviously, who've given their lives, and their families who have given their time and lives for the service of our country. So I certainly honor that. But I think in part of honoring that is making sure that their efforts and lives aren't spent on things that are wrong. And I think the war in Iraq was clearly wrong. It distracted us from the effort to go after al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and so I think that was a justifiable endeavor, but I think its mission got totally made less precise and less achievable. But the war in Iraq itself was a total distraction, and I think history will show that it was one of our worst blunders. That's how I feel about it.
Great, thank you. So the next question will go back to, what is your view on assault weapons?
That's me, probably.
That's
right?
you, Doug.
I think assault weapons belong with the military. I'm a gun owner. I believe in the Second Amendment. But why an individual would need an assault weapon, I do not know, unless they're serving our country in the military, and that's my position on that.
Thank you. Angela.
I agree 100% with that answer. I don't understand the necessity. I know that Congress just recently, I think a couple of years ago, rejected the idea of stopping the ban. I mean, of continuing the ban and stop the ban. I don't see the use of them. My husband's a hunter, and I totally appreciate that. He has his guns in the house, and I just don't go near them. But nobody'd want me to anyway, because I don't know how to use one. But I totally respect that, and I respect the backgrounds where that many people have regarding hunting and so on. But why? I mean, I know enough about guns that you don't need an AK, whatever, to go out there and kill a deer. So I don't think they're necessary. I think they're dangerous, and I wish we would go ahead and continue the ban on them.
Thank you. If the top 2 open primary initiative makes it to the ballot, what is your position on this? Angela.
Oh boy. I have looked at this inside out and outside in. I don't like it. And on paper, it looks like, wow, this is a move towards democracy, and it'll be better. Better for everybody. It makes me frightened that so many people right now don't even understand our own primaries. I was speaking to somebody yesterday and they told me, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm an independent, so I can't vote in the primary. I said, what? I said, you can vote in the primary. This lady did not know, and she was, fairly high up there, that she could vote in the primary. She just needed to figure out whether she wanted a Democratic or Republican ballot. So I feel, number one, what we need to do is educate the public on where they can vote and how they can vote and so on, before we start messing around with, it hasn't proven to work in other areas. And I think there are other ways of doing it, which I think would work better as far as going away from the extremism, which I know has been the problem why it's been introduced.
Yeah, on the surface, it tries to solve a very real problem, and that is that there's an imbalance right now in the state, and fairly radical things and extreme things have been happening. However, I think if you look a little deeper into it, an initiative like this would have just the opposite effect and could really support the rule of one party and the elimination of popular choice during the general elections. If you look at the elections, for example, a number of years ago for governor, Matt Salmon and Betsy Bayless pulled in more votes than Janet Napolitano did. So during the election, then you would be looking at not having much of a choice for governor. Obviously, when Janet Napolitano ran, there was a real choice that was made, and I think we need to preserve that type of choice.
Great. Next, we're going to address several questions that relate to water, since they don't overlap a lot, and there seems to be a great deal of interest related to water here. So, Doug, you get to start on the first one. What state policies or laws on water do you think need to be changed? And if elected, would you try to push them forward as legislation?
Well, right now, Arizona water use is really governed by several statutes, and what they don't allow, for example, you can sink a well and it would have no, whether it pulled your neighbor's well dry or not, it really wouldn't matter. One of the things that we probably need to look at are water management districts that can fairly manage water use and equitably distribute those water rights to different organizations. I think the pumping of the Chino is one example where we may need to look at some type of a regional solution toward water resources as opposed to, get what you can whenever you can and leave your neighbor dry. That needs a more comprehensive and a more regional solution. And I think the state legislature can play a role in that.
Excuse me. The problem is we live in a semi-desert, and we don't have enough water. And that's the bottom line, no matter what. We really don't know exactly how much water we have. That's another problem. Do we have 100 years supply when we build houses? We don't know. Obviously, what we have to do is control our growth based on the amount of water we have, and we don't do that well enough. What's been interesting here in the Verde Valley, and certainly, in Sedona, where I live, is the actual population growth is going down, at least has recently. But that's only going to be a trend. It's a very short trend. On the whole, the population growth is going to go up. I would like to see, and it's not necessarily through state legislation, but I'd like to see pricing used as ways of getting conservation. So, for instance, the extra unit of water that's used would cost more. So you'd have a cap and trade type usage system, but used for water instead of gas or instead of electricity. But anyway, that's a huge issue, I know. Not enough time.
Great. Both of you have sort of answered a couple of the next questions, so I'm going to combine them so that both of you have an opportunity to address each sort of one of these issues as it relates to water. They are: describe your views on management of water and other natural resources. What would your stand be on growth and as it relates to water? And then your position on the Big Chino Valley and the transfer of water to Prescott.
Who's next?
I believe, Angela, you're next.
Okay. I think I answered half of that in my first question. So, yes, water needs to be managed, and I think as I mentioned, it can be managed on a local basis. I've spoken to a number of people here, well, actually in Clarkdale as well, and also in Payson, that those two areas have really been looking at conservation. And in fact, I found a really interesting fact is that the best area for conservation right now is actually Payson, and that Payson has the lowest usage per house, and I can't tell you exactly the actual units, than any other place in our district. So I'm interested to go out there and speak to their mayor, which I'm going to do, and find out exactly how they do that. But that is something that we need to look at, and yes, we can do it. Cap and trade is tough, and it got thrown out of Congress. But I do feel that we need to have ways and means of inducing people to conserve, and I guess the key word is inducement, and there are ways of doing it.
Sure. There's a direct relationship. Water and water issues cannot be separated from land use and growth. They're absolutely joined with one another. So we have to look at our land use decisions and decide, is this a sustainable undertaking? Do we have an assured water supply, for example? Is it an active management area? What conservation measures are in place? And so we need to, and in Chandler, for example, we extensively used reclaimed water. We didn't allow any golf courses, for example, at all, unless they watered their grass with reclaimed water. So reclaimed water is going to have to be a part of that. Conservation is going to have to be a part of that. Smart planning practices in considering and approving sustainable development will be part of that as well.
Thank you. Do our post-secondary schools need reforms or improvement? And if so, what? Doug, you're up.
One of the challenges, and I talked about community colleges before, is they're not all treated equally in Arizona. Equalization treats some community colleges much more equally than they treat others. And that leaves some community colleges really, really hurting. And I think they could be the backbone of a post-secondary system. They're oftentimes the bridge between high school and college. They're oftentimes the bridge between a worker or a citizen and a job. And I think we need to look at more equitably funding our community colleges, because right now it's terribly inequitable, and some get way more funding than others. And that affects tuition costs. And we have, in Coconino County, for example, we have the highest tuition in the state, because we get a lot of, very little funding, as opposed to maybe a community college elsewhere. So I think we need to fundamentally look at how they're funded.
As a mother of two who went through college, it worries me as regards how expensive secondary education higher education is becoming. So money, I think, is a huge issue here. Again, the same thing, education at a high level has been cut tremendously. Our colleges, our community colleges, have all been tremendously hit by the cuts we've had in the state. That is not good, because these are the places where our children get ready for their future life and for jobs and so on. I mentioned in my introduction about for-profit schools. That worries me too, and the recent reports that have come out, Phoenix is one of them. They're right here in Arizona. Tremendous profits being made at the cost of kids being burdened by debt and not getting a college degree. That's dangerous, and we need to look at that.
Thank you. Our next question: what is more important to address, education or jobs? And I believe we start with Angela.
Well, we as Doug says, they are joined at the hip, and I love that expression. They are joined at the hip. You can't have one without the other. In other words, as we've heard about Intel and other large corporations, they're not going to come here if they don't have a good working force, an intelligent force of educated young people. It's just not conducive to attracting those kind of businesses and corporations. So education and jobs go hand in hand. We need to focus on both. You can't do one without the other. And unfortunately, this state legislature has tried to. They've looked on trying to budget and so on for the economy, the trickle-down effect, whatever you want to call it. What bottom line has happened is they've hit education badly, and that is going to be hitting our future more than anything. So we need to turn things around and start by reinvesting in our education. That will help jobs. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Doug. Go ahead.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There is no separation of the two. If we want to have a vibrant economy, if we want to attract world-class businesses to Arizona, we have to have a world-class educational system. When you look at what decisions, and I did this my entire career, what decisions a business looks at, or what facts a business looks at when they decide to locate, they look at what the infrastructure is in the area to support their business. And guess what? Schools are an essential part of that infrastructure, an absolutely essential part of that infrastructure. Intel came to Arizona in large measure because of the ASU electrical engineering program. They also came because we worked real hard to get them here, but they're inseparable. I agree 100%.
Great, thank you. Well, as it turns out, we have a little time left, so I'm going to open questions to the floor. If there's anyone who has a question to ask that has not been addressed this morning, I invite you to do that now. If you could please stand and speak loudly for us. Thank you.
My name is Gail Ganong, and I live in Cornville. And I don't even know where District 4 is, to be honest with you. Where is it?
6.
I mean 6, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know where that is.
Okay.
But I come here to the gym, I love it, and I just saw the sign, and I'm a Democrat, and I had a real hard time deciding what district I was in until I got the early ballot in the mail and figured out I must be 4 because the two candidates
Okay, you're getting...
Yeah, we're getting, what I would invite you to do is we have a map right up here. So as soon as the forum is over, pardon me?
Or
you can address it?
Let me address one thing really very simply, is that you're mixing two districts. Congressionally, you're in District 4 here in Cottonwood and Cornville, okay? That's a congressional district. However, legislatively, which is for the state, you're in 6.
We are in 6.
You're in 6.
Right.
The whole town
Yes.
is in 6. It goes from Mingus Mountain and it goes all the way through, right the way through to Sedona, the village of Oak Creek, and then into Coconino County. And the map is here to show you. It's a very large district, but that is 6, and that's what you are.
Thank you so very much.
That's okay.
I've been wondering that for the last couple of months. Thank
Can I
you.
add to that maybe just a little bit?
Certainly, Doug.
Just so you know, as Angela said, congressional district, U.S. Congress, legislative district, state house. There are 30 legislative districts in the state. Each legislative district has 1 Senate seat and 2 House seats. And so you'll have the opportunity to vote for 3 different people, both in the primary actually, as well as in the general election. So you'd be voting for a state senator, as well as 2 state representatives.
And you're running for?
State Legislative District 6, as is Angela.
The two House seats, so we're running for 2, so it's 2 for 2, okay?
Okay. Thank you for that question, and I think there are probably others who may be a little confused with some of the remapping and all the different things that have taken place this year. So we will continue to address that as we move forward. Are there any other questions from the floor? Okay. In that case, we will move on to our closing statements. Since Angela began with the opening statements, we're going to start with Doug for the closing statements, and he has 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay.
2 minutes.
I probably won't take that much. I just want to again thank the League and thank everybody here. I have a new appreciation, I have to tell you, of what it takes to run for public office. And I'm doing it not because it's something I felt compelled to do, it's doing it, or that I had a dream of doing. It's something that I feel compelled to do because I think that things have gotten so badly out of balance here in Arizona. There's so many, things that we need to move us forward, and yet it seems like the legislature is considering things that are really just driving us apart. And I want to do whatever I can to help turn that situation around. I have 31 years of public service working in political environments and having to work well in political environments without being political. And right now, obviously, I think the hyper-partisanship that's gripped the state capitol is not helping us move forward. We need to find solutions. We need to work together with one another. We need to speak with one another. I'm doing a lot of canvassing, and I'm knocking on a lot of Republican household doors, and they'll say, hey, I'm a Republican. And I say, good, let's talk. I want to talk. And I think that sometimes catches people by surprise because we're so used to just going in our corners and throwing stones at one another. That's what's got to stop. And those are among the reasons why I'm running.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Angela?
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here too, and as a candidate, because yes, it does change your life tremendously, and for me, it's still a learning experience. So I just love to be with people and to be getting an infusion of ideas from so many different sources. And as Doug says, canvassing, knocking on doors. I could write a book about the experiences I've had. This is just after a month of this, so it's really amazing. But I'm glad I have the opportunity to be able to represent this area. I'm inspired. I'm motivated. I'm also concerned because of what the other options are. We've seen some extreme things being said. We've literally seen people on our opponents talking about waging war with the government. This is not the kind of verbiage I want to hear at all. As Doug says, I want to hold my hand out across the aisle and say, hey, I'm ready to talk if you are. That's what we need. People, one thing I I do have an impression of is everybody is really fed up with what has happened this past few years down in Phoenix. We need to change that. We need to work together. We have enough experience and intelligence on both sides that we can put this, turn this state around. Also, just I had to say this because I am a woman, is I did feel threatened by the fact this state has gone back 50 or 60 years. I didn't like that. I don't like the fact that the state has put its face in my decision-making powers. So that was probably the last straw that made me say, that's it, I'll run. So here I am. I look forward to working with you, to listen to you, to gain your support, and hopefully in November to say thank you. Thank you.
On behalf of the League of Women Voters of the Greater Verde Valley, I would like to thank our candidates for being here this morning. I'd like to also thank you, the audience, for participating, because that's the exciting part about the democratic system that we have, is to share information and to ask questions. I would also like to thank the City of Cottonwood for providing this facility for us today. As I said earlier, the candidates have agreed to stay after if you have personal questions that you would like to discuss with them. And lastly, I have a couple of quick reminders. Remember, those voters registered as unaffiliated, with no party designation, independent, can vote in the primary election, as Angela spoke to earlier today. These voters choose a ballot of the party of their choice from those that are on the primary ballot. This does not re-register you as a member of that party. So please go out and vote. And please remember that the primary election is August 28th, and we please ask you to all be active. Thank you very much.